Hi, everyone. That's rubbish.
How do people usually do start with something like that, don't they? Welcome to our woods.
We're not sure how to open a video, and so that is our opening. The wanderings around how you address a vlog or video thing.
Fitting with the theme.
Yeah. So my name's James. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work in CAMS and I looked after children's service in social services.
And my name is Sasha. I'm a trainee clinical psychologist going into my third year at Sheffield, and I'm about to start a placement within a secure children's home in Forensic CAMS and adult mental health community team. And this is our dog Kiki.
You can find out more about Kiki at #Kiki for Social Change. Yeah, so what's the point of us kind of sitting here in the middle of the woods? We just thought it was a nice setting for us to talk a little bit about our experiences of applying for the doctorate, and some kind of tips, or at least we thought maybe I'd share some of my thoughts around tips and then you'd destroy them.
If it's any good, yeah.
So we talked about starting off with memories of the experience for ourselves as well.
Of applying for training.
Do you want to start, or should I?
You can start. Go for it.
Well, in thinking about this video, I just remember it being quite a kind of journey for myself, because I applied maybe 5 times. I had 6 interviews in the end, so the 6th one was the kind of winner. And so I wouldn't say interviewing was my forte, but then I can challenge that at the same time and think, was it the right fit for the course for me? But regardless of that, I guess the process in itself could be really anxiety provoking. I remember we were talking about the kind of we shared one place we interviewed at, and there was a long old corridor where you had to be escorted to the toilets, and I remember being quite a nervous kind of weir and constantly going back and forth to the toilets before the components of the interviews. And I also remember that moment of where you try and communicate. Hey Kiki, can you just settle there.
That'll do.
I remember one of those moments from a family as well, and the pressure it can have when you're just pursuing it for so long, and being in the car. I remember my dad just like looking back at one point and asking, do you think it's about time you thought about a different route as well? I remember how crushing that kind of was. I'm glad I didn't. You vanished off the camera. Let's shift gear, Kiki. Why don't you wander down there? What about you, hon?
So was that your first time applying at Hearts was that your first interview at Hearts?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's different, is it? Yeah, my experience was I applied 3 times, started as soon as I graduated, and I don't know that my form was that good, because I didn't get many interviews, but had 2 interviews and got on the second time that I sort of had an interview. And my experience of applying is that a lot of the time it didn't make sense. So I think my first time applying, I thought, okay, this is a sort of a bit of a test run. I think a lot of people feel like that because you don't know what to expect. And I got an interview and I didn't expect that. Year after that, didn't get any interviews and was told that I didn't have enough experience this time from the university that gave me an interview last time. So despite having more experience, I now didn't have enough experience. So I think it felt really confusing. mixed communication. So that just left me wondering, well, what am I meant to do now? So my 3rd time applying, had an interview and ended up getting on, which was a surprise. So my experience has been very mixed. and confusing at times, but really good feeling once you do that.
Yeah. It's interesting when you have the comparison, because I always see you having it a bit easy and thinking you got straight on, but actually when you kind of start to dig a little deeper the story as well, there's a bit of difference in there. I hadn't realised you had that gap in between, actually.
Oh, I had that.
I was thinking we'd make this video and I would look like get all the sympathy, the poor guy who went forever.
He went through
and
so
you
many.
just went on like that.
No. Nobody wanted me in the second year.
Okay. So that was our kind of memories of this kind of journey, right? And then we basically thought maybe it'd be useful to kind of share some of the ideas about what having kind of shortlisted myself and read a lot of forms, written a lot of forms. I kind of got a sense of what I view as kind of important for some of the forms, or kind of good advice. I don't know if important's the right word, but what's really important is telling your story, and the emphasis on your kind of, I want to see you in there kind of thing, and that's easy to say, isn't it? It's harder to kind of communicate that and get that across. There's a bit of a journey in doing that, but I want to, I think it's important to show that in the kind of form as well. So almost that it's your story, and if we emphasise that second word for a second, the story component, what makes a good story is it's that kind of beginning, middle and end, and so there's something around structure in there. So what I kind of value and appreciate when someone's trying to kind of invite me into their story and into their world, to kind of meet them via the form, is that there's almost like a really brief beginning and end that kind of remind you this is my values, this is who I am, these are my ethics, kind of thing. And it also makes it a lot easier for the person reading it to kind of have that structure that we're kind of so used to in kind of the world, I guess.
Yeah. I think from reading AP application forms and from interviewing, I think I realised that I feel like psychologists were inherently interested in stories and we're interested in people. I think if you lose that, you've lost the person on the other end. I think that for the most part, if we try to generalise ourselves, we do like to know somebody's story. That's in our job. And I think that needs to come through in the application as well.
Definitely.
I agree with that.
And that's thinking about your audience. So I was thinking, essentially your audience, you've got to remember Phil.
Who's Phil?
I just made this up earlier, but I was thinking, I wrote brief notes for this, and I put course Phil, and I was like, Phil. So Phil is your audience. Think about the course philosophy, and because you're speaking to the course philosophy in some ways, and you've got to kind of figure out how that fits as well. But also in kind of this, when we think about stories, we think about narratives, and in kind of narrative inquiry and kind of narrative therapy, we're thinking about those kind of ghost audiences. Who are we kind of speaking to, who may not necessarily be directly there in that very moment when we're writing our forms, or when the shortlist is receiving the form. But we're very much speaking to them. So be mindful of your shortlister, be mindful of course Phil, the philosophy. I'll stop it now.
I like the idea of writing to Phil.
Yeah,
just don't write Dear Phil. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I guess it's drawing out, you're mindful of the course philosophy, but I guess how that aligns to your philosophy and your own ethics and your own values, and pulling those across. And sometimes that's not through stating them explicitly, but it comes through in the undertones of what you're saying. The examples that you give.
So that kind of feeds into like buzzwords, multiple F words for buzzwords, which is basically forget rather than the other.
The ruder F word.
So forget buzzwords. kind of favour everyday language. It's particular, like you were saying, I don't know, there's affinity to kind of stories and narratives, and buzzwords just don't fit to that. They don't fit to, as you're saying, that sense of who you are or your kind of account. So yeah. Oh, go on, Kiki.
I guess you've only got so many words, haven't you? So if you're filling your form up with buzzwords, you're missing the opportunity to put in something which is maybe more meaningful to you, which will make you stand out.
So buzzwords can buzz off. Oh yeah. We just reached this video of like turned into cheese.
Yeah.
The main other things mindful of kind of not wanting to bark on further is I've said this to you a billion times, and everyone who I've ever read your form, you'll remember this. Is that if you've written your form before, or even if you're process of it, do it now. Do like a thematic analysis to practice what we preach on our own forms, because you're telling that story, but you want each paragraph to kind of be distinct. It's speaking to a quality, a value, or a skill or aspect of your journey. And if you do that thematic analysis from afar, you get that kind of perspective of seeing the broader story of how it is laid out as well, and it really should speak to different parts, like the puzzle that comes together like our formulations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that and it can be something, I guess, if you haven't written a form before, then the way that I started was by doing I think visually, so getting everything down on paper that I wanted to include and seeing how things linked up. And some things will be practical things that maybe you feel really proud of having done, and some things will be more value based, and you can start to create a bit of a map of what feels most relevant. So yeah, I guess you can sort of approach it in different ways, but you're just pulling out the themes that you want to embed, I guess.
Definitely. That's a good starting point, before you even get to the thematic analysis, isn't it? That's the kind of bottom-up process in which you start to map out all of those different themes and values, because that will infuse then the actual statement. Okay. So we thought, do you want to say something on the alternative handbook?
Yeah, so the alternative handbook is produced each year by the pre-qualification group within the Division of Clinical Psychology of the BPS, and it is a fantastic resource that I use every year. It's produced by sending out a questionnaire to all the trainees that are currently on courses, and trainees give anonymous feedback about their experience of the course, so it can be a really insightful document to look at what does the course feel like for trainees, what do they like about it, what does it look like. And I think it really starts to give you a sense of what the ethos is of a course without it coming from the course, so you get maybe a slightly less filtered view. But it also gives really helpful sort of more quantitative information about kind of what kind of teaching they're doing and things like that, so you get a bit more of a sense of that as well. And I don't know if it's in the handbook, but I think something else that I looked at alongside the alternative handbook was how many places each course had and how many people applied. And I think that's just a more practical way of thinking about how many people are you going against in order to get a place. And that's a slightly more practical way of looking at it, and it makes me feel a bit sad, but I do think that can help. I realised all of a sudden that London courses had an awful lot of people applying to them, and you were going to be in an awfully big cohort, and I didn't want that.
Yeah, so that's the thing, isn't it? They get big groups.
Yeah.
You sound strategic.
I did get strategic by year 3. Can't lie.
Yeah, so the alternative handbook is free as well. I forget whether you.
Yeah, I didn't say that it is free.
And there's a few books out there, aren't there? But they do seem also to mirror the alternative handbook style of that kind of feedback from trainees. So maybe that's probably the best starting point, is to look at the alternative handbook, because brilliant resources out every single year.
Yeah, and it's up to date. I think books they go out of date. not yours.
Not good for the recommendation. My one then.
But I think that books that are trying to get you onto the course, I didn't read any of them because I didn't find them helpful. I think books that speak to your values, they don't sort of have that necessity to keep up to whatever the hoop is that you're expected to jump through within that given year. But I think, I never read those books, but I did read the Alternative Handbook, and I think that is a really fantastic free resource.
And that's, as you say, produced by Prequel to the pre-qualification group, which I guess are parts of our personal kind of legacies too, aren't we? We are Sasha and James from Prequel.
Yeah, we are.
So that's another resource, I guess, that people watch the video if you haven't heard of the pre-qualification group, which is a part of the kind of DCP, would be to really check them out, because they are all, the committee groups are run by people who are either training or in kind of assistant roles, or even kind of like undergrad kind of roles, and they're really keen to advocate and kind of consult and offer lots of relevant CPD, and so there's been a kind of there's an energy there that's been going on for kind of many years really, and you can find out loads of different activities that they produce, such as the kind of employment guidelines for assistant psychologists. More recently as well, I guess there's a trainee network developing Association of Clinical Psychologists, which has recently launched, and they similarly will be looking to build a kind of body for trainees to link in together, and very focused on kind of improving the kind of professional body, and addressing things such as kind of registered titles and kind of focus for training, things like that. Should we wrap things up with memories again then? Yeah. So, do you remember when you found out you got on?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that moment will be etched in my mind forever. I remember the morning of knowing that I could find out, and I'm one of those people still that when I get like a result through from training or I get an exam result, I leave it sitting in my inbox for ages. So everybody in the office was going, "Have you rung them yet? Have you rung them yet?" And I think I waited for like 3 hours past the deadline to actually properly ring them, because I tried once in the morning and I couldn't get through. And when I eventually got through, I remember giving my name, and I just had I waited for what felt like forever for them to go through the list of like names that they obviously had, and they went, "Yes, I'd like to tell you you got on the course." And I can still feel it a little bit now. I just remember feeling like the most incredible amount of excitement. Like, it's like child excitement, like when you know Christmas is coming and Santa's been, like that kind of excitement. I cried, and the person behind me thought I didn't get on because I cried so much. And I called James, and James thought I didn't get on because I was crying so much. And then I skipped down the hallway a couple of times. It was a really good feeling.
It's weird how time is so relative as well.
Yeah.
You say like you waited 3 odd hours, and I remember when you called me, it was about 10 to 10 in the morning, and they'd only opened the line at 9:30.
It felt like a long time.
Yeah, I remember reading my letter came through via email, and remember reading that about 12 times over. I was in the middle of a meeting at the time. I didn't want to give the game away that I was sneakily looking at my phone, when really should have been paying attention. But I just bolted out of there, just walked straight out, and just had to keep checking my phone and think, oh my goodness. So then I had to phone my parents and say, yeah, made it. And then the journey began, I guess. So that's something from these stories that we were talking about earlier, is endings are beginnings, of this kind of, well, I guess get all meta. I wonder, this ending of the kind of video, what kind of beginnings could come from this?
Like that.
Yeah. So I guess we just want to wish you all the best then, in terms of kind of reflecting on your journey and thinking about the road ahead. Yeah, I did have a quote from the Surviving Clinical Psychology book that I wanted to kind of read out to kind of end this, which unfortunately it's on that phone that's recording right now. So it's essentially an invitation for us to disengage from the compulsive pulls of competition within this kind of drive, this idea to get into clinical psychology, and really to reach out to one another and have that potential to really shoulder up one another's journeys, and by supporting each other perhaps we can all kind of enrich our journeys and enrich the way forward for one another. And essentially, I guess, clinical psychology training, I've always said, is just as much about becoming a person again as it is about becoming a clinical psychologist. So we'll probably pop on some resources with this video, so don't forget the personal is political. So I think let's inject the political into kind of personal and professional development. Should we give the last words to
Kiki.
a really wise and influential being? What do you reckon, Kiki? This is Kiki the flying chihuahua. Cheers.
Beautiful.